Hello again. So today in this video, I'm going to show you how I make these little artist business cards, thank you cards, calling cards, whatever you want to call them. I like to do these little mini paintings sometimes just as warm-ups to maybe a larger painting session. It just sort of gets me going. And although I do these in watercolor, a lot of times I will be doing a mixed media project or something else. And it doesn't matter that I'm not going to continue necessarily doing a larger watercolor. It just keeps me kind of going in the flow. So I've already done a bunch, and they're just very simple landscapes or scenes. And then I have a whole stack of these little envelopes that I had from my business when we were doing the little mini CDs. We were doing marketing and photography and video stuff for people. So we would, save files on these little mini CDs for them to take. Of course, that was, a million years ago. So they're not useful anymore, but I had a whole stack of these envelopes and I thought, well, I guess I'll just make some little mini watercolors. So I just make some little mini watercolors and I have a whole stack of these available. And so if I sell a painting, or sometimes at open studios when somebody comes in and they, want my information or they want to do a follow-up, I'll just pull out one of these little things and write, my phone number or website or something on the back. Or sometimes I'll just write a little thank you, then throw them in with art that I'm going to ship. So I thought I would work on some of these today to get started. Sometimes I just do them from out of my head, I don't have anything to look at. Sometimes I have a sheet of some pictures that I found on stock sites like Unsplash or Pixabay or Pexels.com that are copyright-free photos. As just a reference, I'm not trying to copy anything specifically. I have my watercolor block. This is a fairly textured watercolor. This is cold press watercolor, 140 pound. It's New York Central, which is a little bit less expensive, even though it's still 100% cotton. So I like to do these little things, on paper that's not quite as expensive as the larger sheets or the Arch paper or something like that I would do larger paintings on. And then I made myself a little square template, basically. And it's really easy to do a number of these on a page. And these are all about 1/4 of an inch bigger than the envelope so that I can paint past the edge. Oops, it slipped. Paint past the edge, and then I basically just trim it down to fit in the little envelope. So it gives me a way to sort of paint off the edge and not worrying about painting right up to the edge, because I know I'm going to be able to trim it. So I'm going to put this a little tighter together, because one of the other things I do as little giveaways, if I have some long strips of scrap watercolor paper back, and sometimes I do because when I teach, sometimes I cut these sheets in half for doing demos and there may be some extras there, is I make little watercolor and mixed media bookmarks. And let me show you what those look like. So you'll see I have a whole bunch of extra pieces here that I haven't done anything with. And what I do is I basically just watercolor them. Some of these are from paintings that I either trimmed off or were just, things I was playing with. But these are fun, and then I punch a hole in them. Now these I've laminated. So you can put, I have a little heat laminator, so I could laminate these. These ones are on the thicker watercolor paper, so I basically just varnished them, or you could put a gloss medium on them. But they make fun little bookmarks, and I have a lot of people that come to open studios and love to take these back, and I just put my name on it. You could also put your website or contact information, punch a hole in it, and just throw a little bit of string in it. And they're great little giveaways. And they still kind of showcase your artwork. And there's all different sizes and shapes. So I like to save these longer pieces and do bookmarks with them. That will be another video, another day. Okay, so now I have my little squares, and it's time to just dig in. Now I'm using my little sort of plein air travel palette today. This is just a metal. Again, this is a New York Central art supply, so it's not super expensive. I found it really, really handy. I take it with me when I go out to teach classes on site, because I can buy these little wells and put my own colors in there. So I'm not stuck with the colors that come with the set. So I have a whole bunch of little trays, and then they just pop in and out. There should be another row here, but I found that I didn't really need that many. So I actually have brushes that fit in here perfectly. So I can take 3 or 4 brushes of different sizes and have them handy. So that's what I'm just going to use to paint today. And then I have a number 8 brush. This is a Princeton brush. I really like the Princeton line. I don't know what all these are. The sort of markings have worn off. I have a lot of Princeton brushes, but I also have a lot of different brushes. This is an Escoda. I love that line too. But I have some different sizes and a nice flat brush. Because these are small, I'm going to use smaller brushes. So this is probably a number 4 and a number 6. And the first thing I'm going to do is go through and put a sky on these. And I'm not really concerned about keeping it within the box, because again, these are all going to get trimmed. Now I'm also going to be a little bit careful that I don't sort of cut this in half. So I either want to put my sky, you know, a larger portion, or my ground a larger portion. And you could do some different color skies. It just depends on like what your little paintings are going to be of. Sometimes I just throw some color on and see what happens. Don't have to be super literal. Like this one actually had purple and yellow in the sky. It was a very raw sienna and very muted kind of color scheme. You could also use yellow ochre.
So now I'm just working on the landscapes after the skies have all dried. And the first two went on pretty easy. This one I was thinking of making it more green with maybe a little mountain scene with a lake. And I'm realizing as I'm painting it, I probably went too dark too fast. It's starting to get a little muddy. So I'm just going to leave it dry and come back and maybe there's something I can do to fix it. So I'm just going to work on a different one. And this one's got a really nice bright sky. So maybe just some hills and just some greenery. I think this one maybe I'll come back and add some trees in, some pine trees. And I'm just trying to keep the front a little bit more in focus or a little bit more in contrast just to give that atmospheric perspective as things go back. So you're always going to see a little bit more detail and a little bit sharper color as things are closer. With this one, I did a few paintings previously where I used these sort of deserty colors, and I really, really liked them. So I thought it would be fun to do a couple of ones where I was using the sort of the purple and the yellow ochres and make it look a little bit more like a warm summery or even sort of deserty scene. And then this final one I decided to do as a little water scene. So like a seascape with maybe some waves, just really, really little waves. Again, these are only 3 inches, so you can't get super detailed in them. But I just want to make them a little bit more interesting than just a, flat thing of water. So I'm adding some additional colors in, some purples and some yellow ochres. And you'll see I also am going to now add a little bit more color to the sky just to deepen that up and make it a little bit more interesting and reflect the colors that I did in the water. So I'm just deepening the back part of the ocean a little bit towards the horizon. And now I'm going to work on this one up here in the upper right that I kind of put too much paint on and everything all bled together. So I'm going to see if I can define maybe some of the land masses and get a little bit more perspective, because right now it's all the same color and just all on the same plane. So you don't really see any distance other than that mountain in the very back. So you see here I'm adding in a dark, what's I'm hoping is going to be like a darker row of trees to the, so that's a little bit closer. Trying to define that water line of the river or lake or whatever that body of water is. And then I have to do the same thing here that I did below and brighten up the sky to match more, to reflect the water. So it has to be a little bit darker. I like the colors on this one. The first layer just was too wet and things just mushed together too much. So here I'm just trying to fix it a little bit so there's a little bit more distinction between foreground, midground, and those distant sort of hills or mountains in the back. Because these are really small, I'm okay with leaving them a little bit more, abstract. They don't have to be super detailed. So I'm going to let that one dry again and see what it looks like once it's a little bit more dry. So now I'm just adding a little bit more detail in the water. I'm going to add a little bit more detail in those sort of deserty scenes to define the mountains and that stream or roadway, depending on how you want to look at it, that's coming down from those 2 hills. Putting in like a little bank of trees maybe back there up against the base of the hills, adding a little bit more color in the landscaping coming forward around the river or stream. And here I introduced burnt sienna, which wasn't really one of the original colors. So I think I'm trying to decide if I need to pull some of that purple back in or go darker with some of that purple to really bring that tree line out a bit. And I think the burnt sienna may be too red, so I'm just sort of pulling back some of that a little bit. With the purple, it kind of turns a little bit more brown. I'm just going to add a little bit of that blue purple into the hills there. Now this one up here, I want to make the mountains a little bit more defined with some crevices, so they look really more like mountains instead of hills. The one below could just be hills, even though it's, you know, it's a little pointy, but so now here I'm thinking more mountain or, you know, like a mesa, something out in the desert. Keeping it really cool, sort of in that purpley color. And now I'm gonna add some yellow ochre back in there. Again, just because I have it in the sky, I want to make sure that I'm kind of pulling that color through. And there isn't much vegetation in this one, so I'm just creating some small areas of just texture and contrast to make the foreground a little bit more interesting. And I'm just checking to see how dry the other one is. And so I'm going to work on the waves a little bit here just to define those a little bit. So now I just added a little bit of the white gouache just to create some foam or spray on tops of some of those waves. I decided over here I was going to just kind of do this little field of, I don't know, flowers of some sort or weeds with pretty blooms on them just along the foreground, and leave the hills just kind of as they were, just fading into the background, and not do much more with this one, and keep it really, really simple. It's just like a giant field of flowers maybe hanging out there in the front. And then just a little bit of definition on the hills to pull that front one a little bit closer. And just using really thick paint to just add some little yellow dots in there to indicate some other colors for flowers. So now I'm going to move back to this one. I'm not quite sure what to do with it, so I just keep fiddling a little bit. I decided to pull some of the highlights out of those front sort of shrubbery vegetation areas and add a little bit of color in just to see if I could break up the greens. It's just a lot of green, a lot of dark green. There isn't a lot of bright greens here. So I had to really just add some burnt sienna to indicate a little bit more color and a little bit of shadow towards the base of those trees. And again, I'm using white gouache just to add some sparkle on the water. And you'll see that it jumped ahead a little bit because I messed with it a little bit more. I should have left it. So I decided to just move on. These don't always work. Sometimes, you know, you get one or two that are just don't work, and it's okay. It's all good. Every time you get to paint, you just get a little bit better and a little bit better and learn something else. So I wanted to come back and define this tree line a little bit. So I'm just using a really deep purple, putting that in, adding a little bit of texture in those front areas that are coming towards the foreground. And again, just making a little bit more atmospheric perspective by changing the values of which hills are more distant. Giving that one back one just a little bit of yellow ochre to pull in some of that sky brightness from the yellow there. And then I decided that we really needed to go darker with the sky because the front trees are really dark and the hills were pretty dark green. So the sky didn't really match with the values I had in the landscape. So I decided to just go a little darker and maybe push those colors just a little bit. Even if, you know, purple isn't and green together aren't really a natural sky color, it's okay. You know, these are just my little out of my head landscape vignettes. And then I just wanted to mimic some of that sky color there in that little stream that's flowing out of the hills there. And just defining that water line a little bit more with a little bit of a dark edge on it. I may be getting too fussy here, but I do have my tiny little brush, so at least I'm not making, you know, big changes. Just straightening up my tree line, horizon, adding a few more little dots and dabs in the midground there. Okay, so now it's time to do my trees over here. So I decided I'm just going to do a couple of giant pine trees off to the side here. Maybe put them a little bit on a hill, just so there's a little bit of a slant there. And sort of, again, green up that front foreground area to pull them forward. And put a little bit of definition in the hills back there to show the layers, that there's a couple of layers of hills back there. I think I probably could have left off that yellow ochre in that midground there, and sort of that flat field, and just left it the way it was in hindsight. But it does dry lighter a little bit, so I think it's okay. I wanted to add a little tiny tree line back there and some texture into that field. I wanted it to look like a field of trees or something and not just flat, to sort of pull the texture from the pine trees back into the background a little bit, so it wasn't all by itself. So there I was just showing that the little envelopes that I use have a round opening, so I want to make sure that I have something interesting that's more in the middle of the painting so that it shows. And I was concerned that the trees were off to the side a little bit, so I think that's probably why I did a little bit more texture in the field back there. So now I'm just looking for areas that I need to just do some little tweaks. Things have dried and they dry lighter, so do I need to darken them up a little bit more? This one is a little bit flat, so again, I need to add a little bit more contrast in those hills or mountains. So you'll see I go quite dark here, almost with straight violet, I think with a little bit of maybe sepia or burnt umber mixed in. I really wanted to push the dark areas of those mountains to really make some more three-dimensional looking hills. And here now I'm saying I need to add more dark into my little mini sort of seascape here where the waves are, the bottom of the waves are generally darker. So to make those look like more like waves, I wanted to darken up underneath those sort of white areas that I put in with the gouache. And then I decided I was going to put some birds in just to add some interest to the sky, especially in the seascape because there isn't like a lot of big waves or anything, so it's not super interesting. So a few little birds here and there. And I think I add a few birds, to this one as well, just again because there's nothing really in the center there. So when I stick it in the envelope, it wouldn't be very interesting. So I just speckle in a few little dots. And now I need to let them dry and I can take a look at them.
Okay, so I cut these out, and these are 3 inches by 3 inches. And I think they're all okay except for this one. I did go back and try to fix it a little bit and maybe, make this tree over here bigger to sort of get rid of that blob there, but I don't think it's working. So that one's not going to go into the stash of little cards, but the rest of them are good. So, or at least they're acceptable. Again, these things aren't meant to be high-end paintings that I would sell. They're just little giveaways. So you could spray varnish these or wax them if you're concerned about them getting wet. I don't worry about them too much. I just make sure they're dry, and then they just go inside the little envelopes. And you can kind of see what they are through the window on the front. And for me, it's a way to use up these little envelopes without throwing them out. And I really think it just adds a personal touch when I sell a piece and either mail it or just as a little thank you card that I stick inside. Even this one, which had the weird colors, I wasn't sure about, but once it got cut out, I think it was fine. So, they all have these cute little sort of vignettes that show. Now, I don't do a ton of these all at once when I'm not quite sure what I want to paint, or I just want to get in my studio and haven't been painting for a while and kind of want to warm up, or I've got my watercolors out. I'll just set up, a page and do 6 of these at a time. And, most of the times I get 3 out of the 6 that I like, or 4 out of 6. So my little stash is probably replenished at this point in time. But it's just a great little idea to just kind of go a little bit extra for your clients or just as giveaways to friends and family.
I'd love to hear what you do for your artist cards or as little thank you notes. Put that in the comments below.